Hello, everyone. This is Kelly Clausen, and on behalf of Q1 Productions, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, and thank you for joining us. Today's webinar will discuss implementing and maintaining PMS and performance evaluation under the IVDR. We are very lucky to have James Shearn as our speaker today. Please note that a copy of the recording will be sent to all registered attendees upon completion of today's webinar. There will also be an opportunity to submit questions to our presenter via the Q&A option on your Zoom toolbar. And you can do this at any time during the presentation. I encourage you to be as specific as possible when submitting these questions. Please feel free to provide an example or reference back to the particular areas within the presentation to better assist James in thoroughly answering your questions. Without further ado, I would like to briefly introduce our presenter. James Shearn has a degree in medical electronics and has worked in the medical devices and in vitro diagnostic devices, IVD sector for 27 years. His early career was in medical device research and development before shifting focus to regulatory affairs. Throughout his career, James has held roles with several large manufacturers working in fields of drug infusion systems, cardiology, diabetes management. His most recent industry role was as the Vice President, Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance of, will I be able to say it, on Immune, an immune diagnostics company with a focus on early detection of cancer and autoantibody profiling of autoimmune and infectious diseases. James has also worked as an independent regulatory consultant, predominantly with small and medium-sized enterprises, and has recently returned to the consulting space. Thank you, James. And with that, I will pull up our presentation and we will get started with Q&A afterwards.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, which will be on implementing and maintaining post-market surveillance and performance evaluation under the IVDR. My name is James Shearn, and I'm your presenter for today. So during this webinar, we will go through an introduction to Celegence. We'll then talk about post-market surveillance and performance evaluation under the IVDR and how those two subjects interrelate. We'll then go through a few practical steps for success, and then talk about the challenges of managing replicated content under IVDR deliverables. And then at the end, we'll have some time for a few questions. So just a little bit about me, the presenter. So as I say, my name is James Shearn. I've worked in the medical devices and IVD industry for about 27 years. I've worked for a number of companies, including a number of the major players in both the medical devices and the IVD space. I've also spent time as a consultant. My most recent industry role was as a Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance for Immune, which is an immunodiagnostic company. And I've recently returned to the consultancy space. Now, a brief introduction to Celegence. Celegence was formed in 2017 with the intent of improving quality and compliance and reducing costs for the life science industry in the areas of regulatory affairs. The business serves some of the top global companies in both the device and pharmaceutical sectors and provides niche regulatory affairs services such as medical device regulation gap analysis, CER rating, device registrations, and other operational and strategic activities required for the global device, combination product, and diagnostic compliance. Celegence has offices in the US, in the UK, and in India. And the delivery center in India, combined with our large network of device experts, allows us to provide an onshore offshore model to clients, which both ensures high quality and cost efficiency. Our global team of experts allow us to support with country-specific requirements as needed. Now, on this slide, you can see more about our team's expertise in many areas of medical device and diagnostic RA and QA. We've worked with multiple clients in many therapeutic areas. We are also developing technology to improve the efficiency of EU MDR and IVDR compliance operations, specifically focusing on PMS documentation with the guidance of our internal team and the SME network. The Celegence team has produced hundreds of notified body approved documents, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you need any extra compliance support. Our proprietary technology platform, Captis, makes it much easier to review various sources of data for PMS documentation, including clinical evaluation reports for medical devices and performance evaluation reports for IVDs. This system seamlessly integrates with many public literature databases to help the writer conduct systematic literature reviews and reduce the manual effort, saving hundreds of hours for medical writing teams. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out to the team for a demo on this groundbreaking solution. So now let's talk about post-market surveillance and performance evaluation under IVDR. So in accordance with the IVDR Article 78(2), throughout the product lifetime, we're required to systematically gather, record, and analyze relevant data on quality, performance, and safety of a device in order to draw necessary conclusions and to determine and implement and monitor any preventative and corrective actions. Also under Article 78, it tells us that the PMS data is used to update the benefit risk determination of the and improve risk management, update design and manufacturing information, the instructions for use of labeling, update the performance evaluation, update the summary of safety and performance, identify the need for preventative corrective action or field safety corrective action, identify improvements to usability, performance, and safety, contribute to the post-market surveillance of other devices, and to detect reports and trends. Now, for many of you, a lot of these themes in here will be very familiar. There are themes in here which we as an industry have done for a long time. Some of the items in here are also new. So if we look through, we can see that, for example, updating the benefit risk determination and risk management is something that would normally happen under the ISO 14971 risk management. Updating design and manufacturing information, labeling, IFUs, etc., and identifying improvements to usability, performance, and safety are things that would normally be expected to happen under a current post-market surveillance process. And updating the need for corrective and preventative action and field safety corrective action wouldn't be functions of a CAPA process and a vigilance process. And detecting reports and trends is something which should be familiar to people under MedDev 212.1 for many years. But we also have some new items in here. So, for example, the performance evaluation is a new deliverable under IVDR, as is the summary of safety and performance. And then we have this specific requirement to contribute to the post-market surveillance of other devices. Many companies will have already been doing that within a similar portfolio already, but it is a specific requirement under the regulation. So moving on, I'd like to talk about PMS in the context of a transition from compliance under IVDD to IVDR. So as we go through and transition the technical file of a product from IVDD to IVDR, we're going to go through a number of sections. Firstly, we'll go from having an essential requirements checklist under Annex 1 of the IVDD, and that will require a detailed gap analysis to then make a conversion to the general safety and performance requirements and a checklist for that under IVDR. Similarly, the structure of the technical file under IVDD is somewhat different from the structure of the technical documentation under IVDR, and therefore there will need to be a restructure of that in order to meet the IVDR requirements. In amongst that, review of particularly of the essential requirements and general safety performance requirements, additional technical and scientific data is likely to need to be identified as needed to address gaps between the IVDD and the IVDR requirements. That data is then going to end up in the performance evaluation report, which will become an input into both Annex 1 and Annex 2 under the technical documentation. Looking into the post-market surveillance requirements, so we had post-market surveillance under IVDD. Under IVDR, the post-market surveillance process is very prescribed in great detail. So a new process will be required to be developed and put in place in order to meet the requirements under IVDR for Annex 3. And then in running that process, that will then have an impact upon the performance evaluation report. It will update the performance evaluation report, which we've talked about is required to demonstrate compliance under the general safety and performance requirements. So one of the questions we need to ask ourselves as we go through this process is, how good is our existing post-market surveillance? And does it, if it's not at a sufficient level, do you need to run that process as an input to your performance evaluation for the first time? And if that's the case, that means that all of that process has to be in place and have run in order to provide that input, which is important for scheduling of a project. So, as I said, we have new deliverables under IVDR for post-market surveillance, and new deliverables require new procedures or updated procedures to create them. So we need to create the procedures first, run the procedures, and produce those new deliverables. So under our post-market surveillance procedure, we will produce a post-market surveillance plan, a post-market performance follow-up plan, a post-market performance follow-up report, periodic safety update report, and summary of safety and performance. And new deliverables under the performance evaluation procedures, which is a new structure of work underneath IVDR. We're going to produce a performance evaluation plan, 3 reports, a scientific validity report, an analytical performance report, and a clinical performance report, all of which will then feed into a clinical evaluation report. So things are very different under IVDR with respect to PMS from what we've had previously under IVDD. So many of the processes that we have in post-market surveillance under IVDR are pre-existing, but they may operate independently and on different schedules, and they may have been infrequently performed. And often they're unlikely to conform to the prescriptive format that's defined in IVDR. So the example that I like to use of this is it's a bit like a silent disco. So for those of you not familiar, a silent disco is a disco where everybody wears their own set of headphones. Everybody dances to their own favorite music. So you have a lot of people in the same room, processors in the same room, dancing along, different tunes, different moves, at different speed. And their interactions, they will interact occasionally. Occasionally they'll bump into each other, spill each other's drinks, but they're not really working together. And under IVDR, the effective sequencing and coordination is critical to the success of post-market surveillance. All the sub-processes have to execute on time and in the correct order. The quality of the output from one stage is critical to the success of the next. And the format of many of the deliverables is highly prescriptive. And sections of text within these deliverables are reused time and time again across them as you go down through the process, and they must remain consistent. So, previously we've had our silent disco where everybody's dancing at different speeds, different tune. So we're going to go from that to something that is far more highly choreographed, where it's not just the same tune, but everybody has to dance in step, a bit like a ballet. So let's look at how these things fit together and what the order of the various deliverables is. So there are differences depending on the classification of your device. So let's start with Class A and Class B devices. So we're going to start by having a post-market surveillance procedure. And under that procedure, we're going to create a post-market surveillance plan. And in conjunction with that, there will be a post-market performance follow-up plan, unless it can be deemed as appropriate that there is no post-market performance follow-up, in which case a justification has to be documented within the performance evaluation report. Under the post-market surveillance plan, we're going to gather a large and diverse set of data. So we're going to have data on serious incidents, field safety corrective actions, non-serious incidents, and data on undesirable side effects, trend reporting, feedback and complaints, relevant literature review, and searches of databases, etc. We're also required to have publicly available information about similar medical devices. And then alongside that, coming out of the post-market performance follow-up plan, which is the plan that defines the active things that you will be doing in the PMS cycle to understand your product better. So for example, additional studies and so forth. You will have to have a post-market performance follow-up report that will detail the output of the last cycle of post-market performance follow-up. All of that information needs to be collated and reviewed and summarized, and then used to update the benefit risk and the risk management, update the design information, the manufacturing information, the instructions for use if needed. And also importantly, and this is where we get into the link between the performance evaluation and PMS, it's used to update the performance evaluation report. And for a Class A or a Class B product in the cycle, we're then required to produce a post-market surveillance report, which contains the results and conclusions of the PMS analysis and a rationale description of any preventative and corrective actions taken under that cycle. And that's made available to the competent authority on request and, if applicable, the notified body on request. So let's next take a look at what we need to do for Class C and Class D devices. So much of this is very much the same. So again, we have a PMS procedure, PMS plan, and PMPF plan. And then we have the same inputs and outputs as we spoke about before. And similarly, that information is also used to update the risk benefit, risk management, design information, IFU, and update the performance evaluation report when necessary, but at least annually, which means that for Class C and D devices, we have to do this every year, minimally. For C and D, we have a different output. So we have a periodic safety update report, which contains the conclusions of the benefit risk determination, the main findings of the post-market performance follow-up. It also contains information about the sales volume for the product, the population and usage frequency. That is also updated at least annually, and it's also made available to the notified body and the competent authority on request. There's an additional document, which is called the Summary of Safety and Performance. This document is sent to the notified body via UDAMED when available, and it will be published externally. And also, if you are making Class D devices, the periodic safety update report is sent to the notified body via UDAMED, and also that way becomes available to the competent authority as well. So that's quite a lot of detail in terms of the relationships of these various different deliverables. But now let's just talk a little bit more about the practicalities of pulling this together and how you might structure your procedures such that this concept can be made to work as a practical component of your quality system. So thinking about where these deliverables come from, the PMS plan and the PMPF plan start off as deliverables out of design control in the latter stages of the design of the product pre-market. Within your PMS plan, you can define the sources and the analysis methodologies that you're going to use to pull together all this information that's required to come into your PMS. And obviously your PMPF report will be defined by what's in your PMS plan. Gathering this information together can be quite a challenge because often it comes from a diverse range of sources and will be owned by different people within your organization. And something that can be helpful to make that manageable is to design a set of reports by function or several functions where the specified information is pulled together into templates. So there's guidance as to what should be coming into it. And that then allows that information to be summarized consistently year on year by the various different functions. And in terms of being able to review that information, it is often very helpful to do that via cross-functional review. So you can take these reports, they come into that cross-functional review. Potentially you can summarize relevant information into a set of slides to go along with that. The review will then come together and have a series of actions, having reviewed that data in the round. And while you're there, because you've got the right people in the room, because you've got the right data available, you can potentially also use it to confirm the benefit risk for the product. So obviously that meeting is going to have a set of formal minutes and will be compiled with all the supporting evidence behind it. And if you've got a Class A and B product, that can actually be your PMS report. For Class C and for Class C and D, we have other deliverables, but from that report, from the actions from that report, we can then use that to drive the updates to benefit risk, design information, performance evaluation report. And we can utilize the normal mechanisms that we have for control, so design control, change control, kappa if need be, in order to do that. So moving on from that, for Class C and D devices, we take those outputs, we take the PMS output, we can combine that with data on sales volume, usage, usage population, and usage frequency, put that into a PSUR template, and the requirements for the PSUR are very, very well prescribed within the regulation. Review and approve that, and that generates our periodic safety update report. Moving on from there, we can take that information and the PMS output, we can put that into the summary of safety and performance template, again, a very prescribed document, and extract information from the declaration of conformity, technical documentation, design history file, and quite heavily from the instructions for use, review and approve that, and that turns into our summary of safety and performance. This then is uploaded onto UDAMED, and it's reviewed by the notified body, and there'll be a defined review language for that. Having been accepted by the notified body, that then gets translated into all of the languages of the member states in which you sell the product. And just as an additional item to look at offline, there is an MDCG guidance document, which is 2022-9, which gives a template for summary of safety and performance. I'd strongly encourage everybody to review that, because in my experience, the notified bodies are quite hot on requiring the summary of safety and performance to be in accordance with that guidance. So all of that really needs to be done underneath a post-market surveillance schedule in order to coordinate inputs and ensure timely outputs. If you have multiple products, you're probably going to want to phase that over time, over the course of the year, because you don't want to be doing some of these high intensity activities, like, for example, literature review for all of your products all at the same time. And in amongst that, you probably need to consider linkages to management review. So, for example, KPIs around the performance of your complaints or PMS process in there. And also you need to consider linkages to other processes such as change control. So let's now take a look at a little bit more detail around the performance evaluation component of this. And if you remember, this falls in the middle of that cycle. So it's very much linked to PMS. See Article 56 for details. So under performance evaluation, we will have a performance evaluation plan. And then we have the three pillars, three reports that come out of that. So we have the scientific validity, which is the association of the analyte with the clinical condition or physiological state. We have the analytical performance, which means the ability of the device to correctly detect or measure the particular analyte. And then we have the clinical performance, which means the ability of the device to yield results that correlate with a particular clinical condition or physiological or pathological state. All of those reports, the three deliverables there, then go into the performance evaluation report. So if we think back to the previous slides, we think about that one block in the center as the performance evaluation report. It's not a single deliverable, it's actually 4, 5 if you include the plan. So on an annual basis, we need to update all of those reports, and the output of that will then inform the post-market performance follow-up plan for the next year. So every year we're going back, looking at the output from this cycle, and then deciding what to do in terms of updating the performance evaluation plan and the post-market performance follow-up plan. So there is some additional guidance on this, which you can find, which is MDGC 2022-2. And there's also a standard for performing clinical evaluations, which is for ISO 20916-2019 for in vitro diagnostic devices, clinical performance studies using specimens on human subjects, which is useful to see. So now let's look at practical steps for success when implementing PMS and performance evaluation under IVDR. So when planning for assessment, evidence of compliance with the PMS and performance evaluation requirements of IVDR is required as part of the stage 1 assessment by a notified body. And in fact, for at least one major notified body, it gates you actually being able to submit an application for assessment. So with the exception of the PSUR, a full set of PMS and performance evaluation outputs are required for the technical documentation assessment. Instead of PSUR, you can provide a summary of the PMS history for the product, but everything else needs to be in place. So the key takeaway from that is that PMS and performance evaluation procedures must be in place in order to schedule the assessment of a QMS by a notified body to IVDR requirements. And those processes must run a cycle in order to produce the documentation for the technical documentation review. So those components of the PMS have to have been created, implemented, and run in order to be able to be in a position to apply for assessment by a notified body. That's very important when it comes to scheduling a transition from IVDD to IVDR, and you need to plan and schedule accordingly. Now, other things that can be very useful, use of templates. IVDR is, particularly with respect to many of the deliverables we talked about today, is very prescriptive in terms of some of these deliverables. So well-designed, robust templates are an important tool in IVDR compliance. And when creating those templates, it's important that the template titles match the prescribed deliverables in IVDR. So performance evaluation report, performance evaluation plan, summary of safety and performance, etc. And then within those, that section headings match the content required by the regulation. And they're laid out in the same order. And so basically, when it comes to audit, an auditor can see this is what I'm required to have. And I can see I've got it because I've got the same title in the same order. I can see what I'm expecting. Templates help guide the creation of consistent content and complete deliverables that are easy to audit and update, therefore. Now, let's talk a little bit about literature search as a component of this. So literature search is a very important component of both post-market surveillance and performance evaluation. One of the questions to be asked within this is, so updating of the performance evaluation is required on an annual basis for a Class C or a Class D device, and you're required to update your PMS as well. So can your organization use one set of searches for both, synchronizing the cycles in order to avoid repetition? Good definition and documentation of literature search protocols is important. So you might, for example, require different search terms to support your scientific validity, analytical performance, and clinical performance. And also, it's important to note that PMS requires that publicly available information about similar medical devices, i.e. not yours, is also reviewed. So you need to include competitor products appropriately within the search terms. And you can potentially consider the use of specialist software and/or expert external resources to conduct and document literature searches. And just to make you aware that Celegence has a technology solution called Captis, which we spoke about at the start of this presentation, that helps to automate literature review process and reduce the manual effort associated with it. So next, I'd just like to talk about utilizing clinical performance studies conducted under the IVDD to support compliance under IVDR. So under the clinical performance report, you should clearly describe the methods used to demonstrate clinical performance through either clinical performance studies, scientific peer-reviewed literature, published experience gained by routine diagnostic testing, or through other sources of clinical performance data. If we look at the guidance, MDGC 2022-2, clinical performance studies conducted under the IVDD should be considered and identified as other sources of clinical performance data per Annex 13, 1.2.3. The reason being that because they were conducted under the IVDD, they will not conform to the requirements of conducting similar studies under IVDR. So in the performance evaluation plan, the clinical performance report, and the performance evaluation report, we should plan and document an assessment of the quality and completeness of the data, identifying any potential gaps. And that data should then be supported by either literature and/or data from published experience gained by routine diagnostic testing. So next, let's talk about managing replicated content in IVDR deliverables. As we spoke about earlier, there is many instances where IVDR requires the same content to be within multiple documents within this documentation set we've been talking about. So let's have a look at some examples of that. So you're required to document an intended purpose. It's not mandated that you have an intended purpose document, but I can highly recommend that you do because it is used everywhere through the IVDR. Within that, you're going to have a description of the intended purpose. That will turn up in the performance evaluation plan, the clinical performance report, the performance evaluation report. It will then also turn up in your instructions for use and your summary of safety and performance. Looking at other examples, we have a summary of scientific validity that's in the scientific validity report. We have a description of the analytical performance that's in the analytical performance report. And we have a description of the clinical performance that's in the clinical performance report. All of those end up in the performance evaluation report, and they end up in the instructions for use, and they end up in the summary of safety and performance. So when we think about the challenges of replicated content, IVDR requires the same sections of content to appear in multiple deliverables. This presents a number of challenges for us as manufacturers. Version control is usually at document level. So how do we manage it in a section of a document where we're trying to control a paragraph or a page rather than the document as a whole? Also, documents are frequently updated even within one PMS cycle. So how do we map the reuse of content and ensure that it's updated in all impacted documents consistently? Furthermore, how do we avoid inconsistencies resulting from copy and paste errors and other edits when documents are being reviewed by various individuals across the business? As a manual task, it is possible, but it's very labor intensive, and particularly if you've got many products that you're dealing with under PMS. So Celegence has, as we've mentioned before, the tool Captis, which facilitates the tracking and automatic update of replicated content across multiple deliverables for IVDR, including PMS and performance evaluation. So it's tools like this that can potentially help with this particular challenge. So just in summary, as we close the presentation, the processes and deliverables for post-market surveillance and performance evaluation are intimately linked under IVDR. Quality management systems need to be updated and reorganized to produce the required deliverables in a synchronized manner in order to be in compliance with the regulation. Updated procedures and their outputs are a prerequisite for notified body assessment to IVDR, and this is very much a critical factor when it comes to project planning for doing an IVDD to IVDR transition. Good comprehensive templates are a very useful tool in IVDR compliance to meet the very structured deliverables under the regulation. And control of replicated content across IVDR deliverables is a significant challenge for the creation and maintenance of IVDR technical documentation. So Celegence, to help with this, can provide experience and resources to help manufacturers transition their quality management systems, and can provide templates for key PMS and performance evaluation deliverables. And in addition, we have available the Captis technology solution to aid in the post-market surveillance documentation maintenance, including systematic literature review. And with that, I'll end my presentation and we can go to some questions and answers. Many thanks for your time.
Excellent. All right, I see we have a couple in our chat here. All right, we have a question here. If any clinical evidences that is a poster, EQAs, data clinical samples, example samples, IgM positive for herpes simplex virus are available, how can I produce a clinical evidence of the validity of my device?
So I think that falls into, this would be one element of what you would pull into your clinical performance report. So you would bring that in as a reference, and you would discuss that as an element of data in the context of any other supporting information that you have. So that might come in, for example, as something that you identified in a literature review, and be pulled in and reviewed within the clinical performance report, and would then obviously end up in the performance evaluation as a result.
Excellent. Must the intended use be listed on the various reports, or can the report reference the DHF which contains the intended use?
So if you recall from the presentation, I said it's not a requirement for you to have an intended use document, but I highly recommend you make one. And the reason for doing that is it means you don't have to write it out all the time. You can then reference that from your other sections of documentation. It saves you time and space, but also it keeps things consistent. So yes.
Excellent. Is Captis an XML-based tool?
That is probably a question for some of my colleagues from Celegence, rather than for me. I came here to talk about PMS and performance evaluation. I'm sure one of my colleagues can answer that question. So if somebody else on the call from Celegence would like to answer that, that'd be great. Or there's info@celegence.com.
Excellent.
For a question like that.
What is the strategy for third-party controls we need to take to generate CPR?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Strategy for third-party control. So, working with third-party vendors to produce a clinical performance report? Would that be the question for that?
Shah, if you can elaborate on your question either in the chat or in the Q&A box, that'd be great. I will move on to the next one while you're
come back to that one.
Together,
is this around a question for using third parties for assisting in the production of clinical evidence? It's quite a wide question. Let's come back to that when we've got a bit of clarification on that.
Excellent. How to demonstrate state of the art? Would you recommend to prepare a separate document for state of the art as it is also a repeated content, or are there other solutions?
I think you could do it either way. So you are required to describe state of the art within the performance evaluation process. I'm trying to remember exactly which one of the documents it's in, but it is a requirement to describe state of the art. You could do that as a separate document to reference it, or you could do it there. I think it was going to be very much dependent upon you and your business and how that works best in your QMS.
Excellent. Do you think if we define PMPF is not applicable if our product already sold many years and has international standard of product?
It depends. So if you have a lot of data on market about a product and you're not seeing a huge amount of change through your PMS, then it's going to be easier for you to make the argument that it's not required. It's one of those things that you have to come back to every year or every time you run your cycle. So if you're not finding anything new in your cycle, then you may be able to continue to make that argument. However, you have to be aware that your post-market surveillance cycle may throw up things that you were unaware of before, and that may change what's required. So you may, as the output of a cycle, find that you have a new piece of information that requires you to go and look into a particular aspect and potentially do some active work, like running a study. So you have to answer that question every time you run the cycle.
Okay. How much details are required for complaints? Is it just a general number, or do we need to talk about each failure mode?
So I think that is going to be largely dependent on the kind of business you are and how many complaints you get. So if you're the kind of business that gets an awful lot of feedback, you're going to have much more numeric summaries. If it's only like ones and twos, you may find that kind of thing. If you're literally getting sort of 3, 4, 5, 10 complaints or items of vigilance reports, etc., in a given cycle, then you may end up providing more detail. So it is dependent, but it's in the PMS reports, I would tend to go more towards summarization than extreme detail. And then you might be looking at what your top issues are when you go into that cross-functional review. And then that's going to inform the areas where potentially you might want to go and do further investigation to get a better understanding of those particular aspects, or potentially update your design to address those issues.
Excellent. How does Captis generate the documentation to be delivered to the NB and in which format?
Okay, so again, probably a better question asked of my other colleagues from Celegence who are closer to the tool than me. Again, please reach out and ask for a demonstration. I think my understanding is that the Captis is a tool that allows you at the moment to tag and track different sections of text as you compile that documentation. That then needs to be transferred into whatever sort of document control process you are using yourselves. So it's probably not a straightforward answer to that. It probably is very dependent upon you and your business. But please do reach out to my colleagues from Celegence for further information and request a demonstration on that.
Excellent. Do we need to conduct analytical studies for legacy products?
Okay. It depends. It all depends on how much evidence you have. It depends. You need to go through in your performance evaluation plan, establish a strategy to review the data that you have, whether that be in-house data you have from testing, from studies, from literature research, whatever that might be. Define what you're going to do. Understand where your gaps are, and then that will tell you what you need to do. So as we talked about at the very start of the presentation, this is very important when going through for the first time, is you need to identify your gaps, and that will then tell you whether you do need to perform additional studies.
Excellent. I am looking in the chat here. I would just like to direct everyone, Punya has put to reach out to info@celegence.com if you would like more information on Captis. That will answer a couple of those questions that you didn't have the specifics for as much. We do have a couple more here that have come through. This is a question we had earlier, I believe. It's from the same person. For controls, do we need clinical performance reports as per IVDR? These are not essays and not aid in diagnostics or measure the analyte. So can we avoid writing CPRs for controls, which are third-party independent controls?
So I believe you can justify that. That's not something I've had to do personally. But yeah, I believe you can make it adjustment, because obviously a control doesn't have a clinical application in itself. So I believe you can do that, yes.
Okay. For devices under performance study, CE marked, but used outside its intended purposes, not being put into service or onto the market in the union, is it required to submit a PMPF plan in the PS dossier?
I would need to think about that.
Okay.
I haven't got an answer to you off the top of my head for that. Sorry about that one.
Okay, great. Excellent. I'm trying to see if this next one might be in reference to the last one. There is a great degree of overlap in Annex 13 of IVDR between PMPF and PE. Any strategy to manage the overlap?
So I would talk about in things like both performance evaluation and PMS. So, for example, things like when you're going and doing your literature reviews, do you need to be doing some for performance evaluation and some for PMS? So, if we take that as an example, you can help yourself by synchronizing those and doing one set of literature reviews that meet the requirements of both. So again, by looking at the way that, and if we go back to the diagrams earlier on, if you look at the way these things interlace, there are things that you can do to minimize the amount of duplication that you do.
When will UTMed be fully up and running and required to be used?
I've got the data from it. I don't.
Yeah,
that's not really a question for me. Hopefully soon.
Yeah, hopefully soon. Can we write SOTA in SVR documents as some of the companies are asking for the same?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yes, sir. Sure. Can we write, is it SOTA or SOTA in SVR documents as some of the companies are asking for the same?
Right. So scientific reports. I would need to check exactly where the I'm trying to remember exactly which component under which of the reports the state of the art falls. So obviously for the requirements, it has to be in the right place. I'm sure that if you were to include it in SVR as well and then references, that would be all right. But obviously, you need to make sure that each of your deliverables, each of those 3 reports, has all the sections in it that are required by the regulation, because they need to be there for part of the review by your notified body.
It looks like we have a little bit of a follow-up from the question about the overlap. There also seems to be a pretty high degree of overlap of requirements in Annex 14, interventional clinical trial, and the PE. What is the best way to manage both to optimize the overlap?
I'm not sure I've got an adequate answer for you on that today. Sorry, guys.
Yep, no problem. I think I missed one in here. Here we are. We have a couple more here. Can we replace sales volume by another parameter such as number of tests, patients, samples managed?
I think you need to select what is going to be the most appropriate sort of data depending on your kind of device with respect to this. And obviously, whatever you select, it will be reviewed by your notified body, so they will have a view as to whether that is adequate or not. But I think when you look into that, when you look into things like usage frequency, etc., that can be extremely different between different kinds of devices. And sometimes particularly when you're thinking about data associated with complaints and things, you need to be thinking about how quickly your devices get on the market from when you manufacture them, etc. So I think that probably is something that you need to look at on an individual case-by-case basis. And when you do that, if you come up with a strategy, obviously check that with your notified body as you get to that stage.
Excellent. I see one that just came in that says, this could be the same answer you just gave for it if there needs to be performance data for controls, but for controls for Class C devices, is this still true? Also, does it change if it's not a third-party vendor making the controls, i.e. the company as manufacturer for their own? And does the answer change if you were referencing the controls in your instructions for use?
Gosh, there's a lot in there. I'm not sure this is really without more information, it's probably quite difficult for me to answer that question.
Sure. Yeah.
Sounds like the kind of thing that needs a bit of picking into. So, I probably wouldn't want to answer that on this particular forum here.
Sure. Perhaps a separate call.
Yeah, and if feel free to send that question into obviously this webinar and see if I can come up with an answer for you.
Excellent. We have a question here that says, thank you for your previous answer. So this might be in reference to a previous question. If we can't find the relative peer-to-peer literature of our own brand product, only can search the competitor's product, the leader brand, if it will be a problem in scientific validity.
Yeah. So I guess it probably is going to depend on how similar your product is, and can you demonstrate that? So if you have 2 products that work exactly the same and they work exactly the same, then I think you can start to make some of that argument. I guess if they work differently, that's probably going to be a little bit harder to make. But as I say, it's about building that evidence, putting that together, making the argument in your scientific validity report to an extent that is credible.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I believe we have answered all of our questions. If you have any questions, we have a couple more moments here before we end the webinar. Feel free to put them in the Q&A box or in the chat. And I saw earlier we had a couple folks with their hands raised, but it looks like we might have gotten to your question in the chat. But if not, feel free to raise your hand and supply some of those questions. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time today. We have answered so many questions, and your wealth of knowledge has been greatly appreciated to us here at Q1, and of course to our audience here today. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions coming in, so I will wrap it up here today. As I said it, one popped up.
Okay.
Can we revisit the question about the requirement for PMPF claims in the PS application dossier for devices for performance study?
Okay. As I say, the requirement for PMPF, and that's something that I would need to go away and review. So
okay,
I can't really give you an answer on that.
Okay, great.
Today, without going and doing some more digging.
All right, excellent. And from your team, I just see to everyone Punya has sent here again that they'll reach back out if there's any audience questions that would like to connect, or any of those further deep dive questions that we had. Thank you again so much for your time, and everyone who has joined us today. Excellent. We look forward to meeting with everyone again, and to another Q1 Productions hosted webinar. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.